everyone, you're watching Global Leaders Network, WINTV. I'm your host, Yun. There are many leaders in areas such as government, non-for-profit organization, business, education, art industry, and etc. Global Leaders Network invites these leaders and shares their wonderful stories. Today, I invited Sargis Sangari and you also Lieutenant Colonel. How are you today?
It's good to be here, yes. So it's an honor for me to be here, to have an opportunity to talk to you. Thank you for the invite and the Korean community overall.
Yeah. So please introduce yourself.
Well, my background is I was Lieutenant Colonel, as you said, U.S. Army Infantry and Special Operational Forces. I served 20 plus years in the military, dedicated for the service of our nation. I was deployed overseas in combat operations, 6 years of continuous combat operations with a diplomatic post as a director of host nation in Kuwait. And once I retired from the military service, my service to the nation continued, where I established the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, where we are a operational and strategic research think tank, policy institute. We help the government and also private organizations when it comes to understanding the Middle East region. However, with that said, we have provided documentation and white papers to the Office of Secretary of Defense, to the Near East Affairs, Iraq and Syria desk at the State Department, conducted operational support with CENTCOM, provided documentations even on Southeast Asia, specifically concentrating on the Burmese genocide, provided support for strategic partners in Asia, to include Japan with their PSIA, where we provided reports for them, especially when they had 2 of their citizens taken as hostages by ISIS, going back to 2014 through 2015 duration, and at the same time to the Australian government, which is a very strategic footprint for us when it comes to countering Chinese expansion within Southeast Asia itself. From there, we also supported the Christian Assyrians. If your listeners don't really know about the Assyrian Christians, I could get into that later on. But we supported them operationally in Iraq with their army force structures that were fighting against ISIS in Iraq and Syria from 2014 to 2017. And part of that process, I also established the United Assyrian Appeal, which is a 501c3, which gave money to the families of those soldiers who were fighting against ISIS to keep the root of Christianity alive in the Middle East, especially in Iraq. We have provided white papers to the National Security Council. We've advised both the administration, the current and the previous, on strategic policies within the region.
I see. I have heard that you're running for office. What is the reason for running?
Well, part of the reason I'm running for office is very simple for me. It's just to rededicate in my service to the nation. I served 20 years for my nation, my adopted nation. As you know, I wasn't born in the U.S. I'm an immigrant who came to the United States. I'm an Assyrian Christian, but I was born in Iran, and after the Islamic Revolution, there was really no place for us to be able to have a life and a future for Christian Assyrians. Because of that, we immigrated to the United States. This country blessed me, gave me an opportunity to succeed beyond what I could have ever imagined. It gave its sons and daughters to me and said, please take him to war and bring him back safe and alive, and be our strategic partner and ambassador for our nation throughout the world. And I have done that in Europe. I've done that in Asia. My first assignment was in Korea while I was in the service. And that dedication allowed me to reconstitute myself, as we would say, to focus, to support my nation again in its struggles and efforts globally, where I was able to establish the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement, as I mentioned earlier, and I established it in honor of the 3,000 Americans that were killed, murdered on our soil. And some of those Americans are still dying because of the effects of the terrorist attacks in the U.S. So run for Congress gives me an opportunity to take all these skills, all these lessons learned, my entire background, what I've come to know as a child, being born in Iran, having to immigrate to the United States, as a culmination of being able to take all those talents and apply them, rededicate them to serving my nation, again in this case, in Congress.
How old were you when you came to the United States?
I was 10 years old when we came to the United States, but 10 years old, and what I saw when I was in Iran during a revolution really shaped my mindset and my life as to how important it is for minority communities to have a voice and have a say. And we really even don't have that even in today's political structure in the U.S. That's why I've always encouraged, and even 2 years ago, going back when the Korean community had introduced a number of individuals running for office at various different levels, that you gotta push your people within this system, within this structure, to be part of the fabric with a voice, not simply be someone who turns over your vote.
What position you're running?
I'm running for the Illinois Congressional District, for the 9th Congressional District. It is a large district, it has 700,000 individuals within its borders, but I'm going to be running against a 20-year incumbent. I am running as a Republican against a Democrat. It's going to be a difficult push, but I think given the minority communities that exist within this district, it is very doable to be able to flip the 14 points needed to have a new voice in House of Representatives at the federal level.
What should the Korean community living in the 9th Congressional District can expect from you when you get elected?
They could expect that I'm going to advocate on their behalf. My Assyrian community and the Korean community have had a very long history going back to 670 AD. That relationship have always existed. The one thing I could bring to bear in this process is that the current changes are being done and have been done under the current POTUS, the President of the United States, when it comes to economic restraints being taken off of a community, gives an opportunity for us, both Assyrian and Korean community, to understand that business is global. And in this aspect, I think the Korean community, as I've said in the past, and I will continue to say it, can be a global leader amongst the various different communities within the United States. Take a look at, as an example, in the, on the West Coast, the businesses in the West Coast early and often started courting other businesses that were from Asia. And in that capacity, they were able to create wealth beyond belief and strength and power where they have a say in politics that they never had before. The cities like San Francisco, Seattle, these cities became powerful because early on they started looking at business that is from a global perspective in Asia. And today, the sons and daughters of those businessmen have access to educational levels, capabilities that we do not have. They're able to educate their children when it comes to future tech capabilities in companies that are going to be global leaders when it comes to countering what we're seeing as far as cybersecurity and within the various global networks that are going to look at future projections of how technology can be very important for a business and for that sector. And I think that is something that the Korean community here hasn't had. It's reality on the ground because you haven't had anybody in Congress to understand that and advocate to be able to bring that capability, that tie here directly to the businesses, to give opportunities for the Korean community to tie itself to the Korean community that needs its support back at homeland, which is going to allow us to not only enhance the U.S. strategic policies, footprint, alleviate some of the pressures, which we call friction points on Korean Peninsula itself, and tie your future generations to that community, which is your community that you have traditional values which you share with. And that is the main piece that I think the Korean businesses and communities can accept. The other piece for us is really the security aspect, to ensure that there is some security provided for the businesses and the communities here, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter that your business is successful if you do not think that your future generation are going to be successful, and you feel that you don't have the security to secure your home and businesses, then it's distracting for you to be able to really guide your family to where you want them to be. So where it would take years for these entrepreneurs to be able to get to the level that they're hoping to, and when you have an advocate in Congress and who understands how to use the systems to get you to be able to be successful, alleviate those pressures, then you can make advances 100 years forward where you never had, and give an opportunity towards capable educational requirements that you don't have currently in the Korean community, where you're going to lose a lot of your talent in Illinois to West Coast or other countries if we do not take those steps to support you.
You're the first candidate actually advocate the reunification of South and North Korea. Why did you came up with this idea, and then what do you stand for?
The first time I ever advocated for North and South Korea unification was when the current POTUS was even arguing with North Korea, and North Korea and U.S. had not even come to the table for unification. Look, every major battle in history has always ended up in the negotiating table. The reality is that the 21st century is changing. How we do global support for various different nations is changing. It is probably the most historically depressing tragedy that the Korean people had to be divided. It is a shame. I served in Korea, my first duty assignment. I was on the other side of the MGM, one of the most forwardly deployed battalions in U.S. Army at that time. And I saw this barrier that was mined, wired, obstacles. We had a soldier who lost his leg in one of the attacks, I should say in one of the operations we were doing, where he ended up by accident getting into an area he shouldn't be. I was there when the U.S. helicopter was shot down over in North Korea. And to me, it was just tragic that the world stood by and allowed this to happen, for the Korean people to be separated. And from a perspective of an individual who thinks that these two communities should unite, and we shouldn't allow these type of barriers to keep them apart, to give them an opportunity to progress for their future, for the Korean people, is a reason why I always advocated for it.
So your first duty as a U.S. Army was in Korea. How was your experience? Tell us about it.
Yes, it was my first duty station. You know, like every other soldier, you go to your first duty station, first time away from family and friends. And one thing about being in Korea was that you're well known, because most other duty stations you have a number of soldiers and officers, but we're very small organizations unit, couple of battalions, and so everybody knew you, so you had to do a good job. Part of what helped me during that year that I was there was our executive officer, who was assigned to our unit. He was a Korean American, so I had a wonderful opportunity to get to know his family. We didn't get that much time off, but when we did, I spent it with his family, and I realized that there's a lot of similarities between my community, the Syrian community, and the Korean community. A wonderful grandmother, very traditional families. They understood the concept of honor, and they understood the concept of, that through our actions we're ambassadors for the next generation. And given the two historical communities coming together, I realized that, you know what, I understand why my community and the missionaries from the Syrian Church of the East in 670 AD traveled from Iraq, today Iraq, all the way through Asia into China, and then established the first churches, Assyrian churches, first Christian churches in Korea, which today we still have a community that is tied to them specifically. In 2002, our bishops from here went back to Korea, and I know that those historical churches were abandoned, but the community in Korea that knows they're tied to the church, Assyrian Church of the East, the global Assyrian Church of the East, has started reconstituting itself in Korea. So for me, it was a sense of understanding the duty, responsibility, not just for the future generation, but for the past generations. That was so interesting to me, and it allowed me to have a much better year. Felt like I was back at home than it would have been if I was in any other possible deployment.
And also, President Trump recently gave a freedom, religious freedom and speech. What's your perspective on this? And then how can all the, not only Korean churches, all the churches can react to this?
I was actually at the White House on the day he signed the executive order. I was there briefing the National Security Council on what is happening strategically to the Assyrian Christians in Iraq and Syria, because the root of Christianity was under attack. So by him signing that executive order, it re-emphasized, especially in Section 2 and Section 4, where it told the Department of Treasury and Department of Justice that religious freedom and expression by these churches is part of the integral fabric of the United States. Has always been there. And that's how our forefathers here in the U.S. had always projected it. Look, the Assyrian church leaders have always been political leaders because they've been the backbone of the nation. Same thing with the Korean churches. The Korean churches are the backbone of these organizations that are out there that are representing the Koreans. It is the executive order gives them now ability where they are, the guidance has been given to the Department of Treasury and Justice to allow them to express themselves. The first patriarch that we've had in the line of successions who was killed in the First World War, the Assyrian patriarch, who was the only national leader to ever been killed in World War I, was killed not because he was a religious figure, because of the politics of the time. And the pressures that have always been there on the Assyrian church, as they have been on the Korean churches, have more to do with the politics than have to do with the standing of the churches on religious issues. And this gives now the Korean churches an opportunity to say that, look, we have a representative for us running. In this case, you're running in the 17th to represent the Korean people here in the state of Illinois, that you should go out there and advocate for her, and gives them that opportunity. And if you notice, as soon as that executive order was signed, a lot of the black churches in the south side of Chicago have allowed even representatives to come speak from their pulpit. This gives an opportunity now for the Korean churches to be stronger as far as affecting policy.
I see, I see. Another question, it's kind of a personal question, but I want to ask you, what is success to you and what brings you happiness?
You know, success to me is that it's really family-based. My father was a millionaire, U.S. millionaire in Iran. When he realized after the Iranian Revolution that there's no really future for us, he left all that. He just basically left whatever was there. Majority of the land that he had, he actually put it in the name of the church and the different churches. He didn't care what the denomination was, but he wanted to make sure that at least the churches of my ethnicity, Assyrian ethnicity, had a footprint. He came here, he was a physics professor in Iran. He dedicated his time, instead of going to school to get his degree to teach physics, He went and worked at a candy shop, making candy. He worked at a candlestick factory. He became a security guard on the south side of Chicago. He did all that because he wanted to make sure that his children had an opportunity to educate themselves while he was, dedicating himself to give us an opportunity to have the money to seek out those higher educations. He graduated all his 4 kids from college. And when my brother finally graduated, he said that to my mom that I finally accomplished my job. The last thing my dad passed on was a pin, lapel pin, which was an Assyrian American flag. And before I closed the casket on my father, that was the last thing that he had on him, which I passed on to my oldest son. And I told him, it doesn't matter what happens to the branches of the tree. My dad established strong roots in the United States for both America and for the Assyrian people. And to me, it's continuing that tradition to make sure that my children's children and their children have an opportunity to look back and say, we have gotten the basic instructions that we need. Our core is strong. Let's move forward and become part of the fabric of this nation, but not to forget our history and heritage, and try to be a voice for improving the lives of others rather than being a burden on others. And really, that's, at the end of the day, that's really all matters. Everybody here is on a temporary visa. We're all going to depart one day from this earth. It's a matter of what they say about you after you left.
I see. Do you have any comments to our audiences today?
The only thing I would say in this capacity is that, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here and giving me an opportunity to talk to your audience. But I would say you today have a member of your community running, in this case, for the 17th Congressional. And you have to support her. You don't have a voice at the table, it doesn't matter. You have to have a voice at the table. The only way you could do it is allow a member from your community to have an opportunity. So you're going to be a wonderful candidate for this community going forward. And I would ask for your support to allow me to be an advocate for you if you give me that opportunity. That's the only way we could progress politically within the current systems of the United States, to have our people or our advocates at the table.
Thank you so much for coming to our station and sharing your story.
Thank you very much for the time and opportunity.
Thank you so much for watching Global Leaders Network, WINTV. If you want to watch this again, you can watch this through our website and YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe us. And I want to see all of you next Thursday, 9 p.m. And until then, have a great week. Bye-bye, everyone.